this year to mark Transgender Day Remembrance. We will be starting off with lighting some candles and listing the names of some folks. I think one of the things, as we've covered in the past, is that in relation to our reading today, there's a lot of injustice that happens to portions of our community, not just locally, but the larger community in the United States and at large. And one of the things that we need to remember to do is to make sure that we remember people and say their names is one of the popular movements right now, as you'll see in politics and some of the protests that have happened during the political debates, that acknowledgement for what has happened to people and how sometimes as a community we may appear to ignore what takes place. So the first known victim in 2019 was Dana Martin, an African-American trans woman who was found shot to death on the side of a road in Montgomery, Alabama. That was on January 26th of this year. Ashanti Carmen of Alexandria, Virginia was found shot to death on a street in Fairmount Heights, Maryland, just across the state line from Washington, D.C. Those who encountered her at a D.C. drop-in center run by LGBTQ support groups, HIPS, found her delightful. HIPS staffer and trans activist Earline Budd told the Washington Blade that Carmen was planning to marry Philip Williams, who told a D.C. TV station that his 6-year relationship with her was the most brilliant thing I've ever done in my life. Upon learning of her death, everything just went on pause for me, he added. Claire Legato was shot in the head in the yard of a Cleveland home after an argument between her and a man named John Booth. Her mother had accused Booth of stealing a tax refund check, and Legato confronted him over the matter. Legato died of her injuries on May 14th. Booth was charged with felonious assault. Malaysia Booker was found shot to death on a Dallas street, a month after she was beaten by a mob at an apartment complex. Police said they did not yet have enough information to say if her murder was linked to the assault, in which she suffered a concussion and a broken wrist. In connection with the beating, one man, Edward Thomas, has been arrested on a charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and has been released on bond. Other arrests are likely, police say, adding that there is no information linking him to Booker's death. In June, Dallas police charged Kendrell Lyles with Booker's murder. He was already in custody on charges of murdering 2 non-trans people in an unrelated incident. The police force is now looking into whether her murder is related to the shooting death of another Dallas trans woman last October and the stabbing of yet another in April. They have not released the names of either women. The stabbing victim, however, did survive. Michelle Tamika Washington, who also went by Michelle Simone, died from multiple gunshot wounds. Tamika was a brilliant and outgoing member of Philadelphia's transgender community, known for her advocacy and mentorship, and she will be profoundly missed, said Amber Hikes, the executive director of Philadelphia's Office of LGBTQ Affairs. Washington had studied nursing at the Community College of Philadelphia. The day after her death, police arrested Troy Bailey and charged him with her murder. Paris Cameron, an African-American trans woman, was fatally shot along with 2 gay men, Alou Davis and Timothy Blanchard, all of Detroit, at a home on the city's east side in the same attack. 2 other people were wounded and survived. The crime was motivated by the victim's identity, Wayne County prosecutors said. Devon Robinson was arrested on June 5th and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of assault with intent to murder, and 5 counts of the use of a firearm in connection with a felony. The body of Chanel Lindsay was pulled from White Rock Lake in Dallas. Police said her body displayed the obvious signs of homicidal violence. The police have reached out to the FBI for help in solving Lindsay's murder. The body of Chanel Scurlock was found in a field dead from a gunshot wound. Scurlock lived in Lumber Bridge, about 20 miles from Lumberton. Local media, police, and even her family misgendered and dead-named her. Friends said she had gone out the night of June 4th to meet with someone who had taken down a Facebook page with pictures of her, and they feared she was going into a dangerous situation. The Robinson County Sheriff's Office arrested Javaris Hammonds on June 12th. He is charged with first-degree murder and robbery with a dangerous weapon. Zoe Spears was found shot to death in Fairmount Heights, Maryland, a suburb of Washington, D.C. Trans activist Earline Budd described Spears, whom she had known for 6 years, as a vibrant young person. Spears worked in retail and had ambitions to become a lawyer. In mid-July, Prince George's County Police arrested Gerardo Thomas of Baltimore and charged him with first-degree murder. Brooklyn Lindsay, an African-American trans woman, was found dead on the porch of an abandoned house in Kansas City, Missouri. She had suffered multiple gunshot wounds, and neighbors said they heard an argument and gunshots at the house a few hours before Lindsay's body was found. In July, police arrested Marcus Lewis for second-degree murder, felony armed criminal action, and felony unlawful possession of a firearm. Denali Barry Stuckey was found shot to death along a road in North Charleston, South Carolina. Police and local media initially misgendered and dead-named her, but police then announced they had learned she was a transgender woman. She was a Charleston native and worked as a manicurist. Police are investigating her death as homicide, but have declined to say if they believe it was a hate crime. A suspect, Dominic Archfield, turned himself in to police on August 11th and faces murder charges. Tracy Single was found dead in a gas station parking lot in Houston, having suffered several severe lacerations and puncture wounds. Her name and her transgender identity were not reported until several days later after investigation by the Houston Police's LGBTQ liaison and local activists. She was also known by the name Tracy Williams. In her honor, Houston lit City Hall in pink, blue, and white, the colors of the trans pride flag, for 2 days in August, and then illuminated a section of bridges in the heavily LGBTQ Montrose neighborhood in the same colors. Joshua Bourgeois was charged with Single's murder. Police said the two had been dating. Marquise Kiki Fantroy was shot to death. This feeling is indescribable. The pain, the void, you know that feeling after losing a child and you losing a child for no apparent reason. Fantroy's mother, Rhonda Comer, told the Miami Herald, and my understanding was she was killed because of her desire to be a woman. Fantroy was shot multiple times in front of an abandoned home, and a group of people were nearby when it happened. Comer says her daughter, who lived with her, was coming home from a party when she was murdered. Fantroy began transitioning before her teens and endured much bullying, according to Comer. The young woman loved photography and music and hoped to one day compete on RuPaul's Drag Race. Pebbles Ladine Doe was found dead in a car in Allendale County, South Carolina. Police have released a few details declining to speak to local media. Her family and friends were devastated by her death. There has been too many killings going on and no one is doing anything about it, Barbara Kohlberg, a relative of Doe's, told a Georgia TV station. Jordan Kofer, a transgender man, was the first casualty of a mass shooting in Dayton, Ohio. The gunman who died in a shootout with police was Kofer's brother. Brett's opened fire in a popular Dayton entertainment district, killing 9 people. Several media accounts identified Kofer as Brett's sister and dead-named him, but the website Splinter and the National Center for Transgender Equality said Kofer was a trans man. Although not out to his family, so his gender identity was likely not a factor in his death. Kofer had been working for the National Forest Service in Montana. Bailey Reeves was shot to death as she left a party in Baltimore the evening of Labor Day. Several people were spotted running away from the scene, but no arrests have been made. The body of B. Love Slater was found burned beyond recognition in her car in Clewiston, Florida. Friends told local media they believe Slater was targeted because of her gender identity. The Hendry County Sheriff's Office has yet to make a statement on the motive for the crime, but investigators do say it's one of the most brutal murders they've ever seen. Italy Marlowe was murdered on September 20th, but police did not release the details of her death until October. When police found her in a driveway, she had been shot multiple times and she was pronounced dead at a hospital shortly thereafter. The Fort Bend County District Attorney has charged Raymond Williams with Marlowe's murder, but he remains at large. Breonna Beebe Hill, an African-American trans woman, was shot to death in Kansas City, Missouri. Police say they suspect the suspect remained at the scene and was taken into custody. The suspect's name has not been released. These victims are not numbers. They were people with hopes and plans, dreams for the future, loved ones and communities who will miss them every day. The one thing before I move into the next section is that part of the presentation was also a visual, and if you will know, there was only one white person on there. The majority of those impacted by transgender violence that we see are trans women of color. And so, we have to keep in mind that within a minority population, a large majority of that minority that's affected is trans women of color. So further, not only being a person of color, not only being a woman, but being a trans woman, the barriers that are encountered and the violence is rather unprecedented. So we're going to talk about some barriers to equality for transgender people. So one of the things that we talk about often is public accommodations discrimination. Only 17 states plus DC prohibit public accommodation discrimination against transgender people, covering just 36% of Americans. So only 36% of Americans in the United States have protections against discrimination in public accommodation if they are transgender. Public bathrooms can be places of serious harassment of transgender people. Transgender people who face discrimination report increased physical and emotional health problems as a result. Employment discrimination. As many as 78% of trans people report harassment at work. Trans people of color experience even higher rates of job loss and discrimination. Only 18 states have clear laws prohibiting discrimination on the basis of gender identity or expression. Housing discrimination. 1 in 5 transgender people have been refused housing due to their gender identity. Only 1 in 10 transgender people have been evicted due to their gender identity. Nearly 1 in 3 homeless transgender people have been turned away from a shelter due to their gender identity. Education discrimination. 40% of gender nonconforming youth report being frequently harassed by their peers. 37% report frequent verbal harassment and name-calling. Students who are bullied and face discrimination due to their gender identity are more likely to miss school, have lower GPAs, not plan to attend post-secondary education, and have high levels of depression and lower self-esteem. Income inequality. Transgender Americans are 4 times more likely to have a household income under $10,000 per year. 87% of trans people have completed at least some college. 47% have a college degree. And to close, I'm going to read an article that was published in CNN this last week. And it was basically what people should know about Transgender Awareness Week. And so this was published on the 13th. Starting today, members of the transgender community will recognize Transgender Awareness Week. But it's not only a chance for them to connect, it's also a chance for their allies to show up. Here's what you should know. What is it? Transgender Awareness Week takes place every year between November 13th and 19th. And it's a time for transgender people and their allies to highlight the community, share their stories, and talk about the issues they face every day. It's also a chance to educate the public, said Jillian Brandstetter, spokeswoman for the National Center for Transgender Equality. Waiting for my... Only 1 in 4 Americans knows a transgender person, she said. And even then, it is still important for people who are not transgender themselves to understand who we are and the issues we face and the barriers that are too often put in our way. This week always runs in the week leading up to November 20th, the Transgender Day of Remembrance. How is it marked? Across the country, communities hold different events and activities to help people recognize Transgender Awareness Week, said Alex Schmeider, Associate Director of the Transgender Representation at GLAAD. People will screen films that are made by trans creators. They will have art shows. Many of the LGBTQ centers across the country will host panels and events that are open to the public for people to learn. Some companies, he said, seek out transgender people to come into their workplace and talk about inclusion. What's the Transgender Day of Remembrance? The Transgender Day of Remembrance, or TDOR, is held every year on November 20th to memorialize the transgender people who have lost their lives as a result of anti-transgender violence. Vigils are held all over the country by different organizations and churches. More than 24 transgender people were killed in 2018, according to the information gathered by CNN, the New York City Anti-Violence Project, and the Human Rights Campaign. All but one of those victims were transgender women, and all but one were people of color. And it's likely the number is much higher. Data is often incomplete because violence against transgender people is underreported, and police, media, and family members sometimes misgender and dead name the victims. How did it start? It started with the violent 1998 murder of Rita Hester, a transgender woman in the Boston area who worked to educate the local community about trans issues. The person responsible has never been found. Transgender advocate Gwendolyn Ann Smith started the Transgender Day of Remembrance in 1999 to honor not only Hester's memory, but also all the other victims lost to anti-transgender violence, said Schmidt from GLAAD. The vigil was really created to commemorate all the transgender people lost to violence since Rita Hester's death. And it became a really important tradition. It's become an annual recognition that people acknowledge and participate in every year. In addition to marking their deaths, advocates also want the media and the public to examine the factors that lead to this violence. It's almost every 2 weeks that we have to talk about a transgender person who has been killed. And the culture at large needs to start having a conversation about why. So what challenges do transgender people face today? Things have been greatly improved for the trans community since Hester's killing, Brandstetter of the National Center for Transgender Equality told CNN. Transgender people are worlds away from 1999, she told CNN, pointing out that more people know someone who's transgender today and support them. More non-discrimination laws are in place to help protect transgender people and their rights, and they're better represented in popular culture. Despite increased visibility, they still face barriers every single day. Discrimination is evident in healthcare, housing, in the workplace, at school, in restaurants, restrooms, the airport, and in their interactions with law enforcement. That prejudice is often compounded by other parts of a transgender person's identity. Whether they're a person of color, undocumented, a sex worker, or have a disability. Another problem is a lot of news stories about transgender people focus on their trauma instead of their strength and resilience, and that can distort the public's view of the community. The transgender community is a group of people who are living in every community, in every neighborhood, working in every industry, contributing positively to society, he said. And that gets lost when there's just so much negativity around who we are as people. So how can you be a good ally? There are so many ways that you can support the transgender community this week, but there are a few. Look at the community around you. It's important to check the policies in place at school or at the office, Brandstetter told CNN, and to ask administrators to consider how difficult or easy they made things for transgender people. This can include anything from examining how name changes are handled, and making sure they are good transition-related healthcare plans. Seek out stories by transgender creators. Brandstetter pointed out that there are a wealth of personal narratives available by transgender people, including on television, in movies, and in books. Learn about who this community actually is from our voices and our perspectives, not from people talking about us. That would include me, a cis white male. Just a side note on that. Call your local LGBTQ center, see what kind of help they need, Brandstetter said. It could be volunteering or offering a professional service that you're good at. Educate yourself. Allies should learn the basic terminologies surrounding the transgender community. For example, people often confuse sexual orientation and gender identity. Learning terminology not only signals to people that allies have done their work to get familiar with who this community is, but are also working towards it being as inclusive as possible. Many trans people are happy to discuss their experience, Brandstetter said, but you shouldn't assume that's the case. There are so many resources out there to help you if you want to learn more about the community and how to be supportive. By being proactive and educating yourself about the experiences of trans people, you are putting a smaller emotional burden on trans people in your life to be your personal guide. And the writer of that was Dakin Ando. So as we close this week, it's important that we all keep in mind what privileges we carry on our day-to-day lives and how we can use that privilege to help those around us. Whether it be helping someone of color, someone of a different income bracket, someone of a different educational background, ability, that type of thing. And so before we close, we'll just have another moment of silence.